The desert didn't wait for permission to burn. 3 seconds, that's all it took for the sun to blaze white off the barrel of a rifle and for silence to fall over Fort Ravenwood's range. Natalie Voss pressed the trigger once, twice, 3 times. When the target cam came back, the room froze. 3 rounds, 1 hole, 800 meters. Impossible wasn't the right word, it was obscene. The jeers from a moment earlier hung dead in the heat. A Marine staff sergeant who'd been smirking at her ponytail suddenly looked like he'd swallowed sand. Someone muttered. No way. But even the wind didn't argue. Off to the side. Ethan Kade folded his arms. 30 years in naval special warfare had taught him to read people. And what he'd just seen wasn't range luck. It was control absolute. Surgical control. And it clawed open a memory he hated. Merrick, his spotter, breathing hard before a shot that should have ended a warlord's life. A half-inch miss. And 36 men died in the counterattack. Ethan had carried that ghost for years. Watching Voss made it come roaring back. "Check her rifle," Colin Mercer barked. His voice cracked across the line of shooters like a whip. Mercer's SEAL pedigree. Square jaw. The kind of man who thought his shadow was authority stormed forward. Nobody drills a group like that. Not without trick glass or a rigged barrel. Voss didn't flinch. She lifted the MRAD, cleared the chamber, and laid it on the table as if she were setting down silverware. Her gaze was level, calm enough to make everyone else uneasy. "It's just steel and breath," she said. The phrase landed heavier than any boast. Steel and breath, simple words, but they made the impossible sound inevitable. Ethan saw the crowd shifting, men with rows of combat patches suddenly questioning the order of the universe. Mercer wasn't done. He shoved past the rangemaster, demanding bore scopes and gauges. His agitation wasn't just skepticism, it was fear. Fear that the hierarchy was changing, that a woman in a plain uniform had just rewritten what elite meant. Ethan wanted to step in, to cut the tension, but his eyes stayed on Voss. She wasn't gloating. If anything, there was a weight in her stare, a distance, like she'd carried this argument before, somewhere darker than a competition range. The air buzzed not from insects, but from a kind of collective unease. What if Mercer was right? What if this wasn't talent, but something else? Something engineered. Ethan remembered rumors. Whispers about units that didn't exist. Programs hidden under layers of clearance. Ghost stories told in barracks after midnight. Natalie Voss finally spoke again. Her voice soft but sharp enough to slice through the Nevada heat. "You can inspect every inch. The steel won't lie. Neither will I." Her words didn't settle anything. They cracked something open. Men who'd come for bragging rights suddenly wanted answers. And Ethan Kade realized this wasn't about a shooting competition anymore. It was a doorway, one that led straight into the shadows he thought he'd left behind. The rangemaster called for a reset, but nobody moved. Not really. All eyes stayed on Voss, the woman who had just erased certainty with 3 bullets. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew what came next wasn't going to be measured in scorecards. And as Mercer's hand slammed the rifle case shut, snarling for an investigation, Ethan caught himself thinking the one question he didn't want answered: who exactly was Natalie Voss? "Hey, soldiers, where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments. We'd love to know, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next thrilling episodes." Ethan Kade hadn't meant to follow the thread. He told himself it was curiosity. Professional instinct, maybe just the sting of Mercer's outburst. But hours after the range incident, he found himself parked outside a gray, windowless building in Arlington, one that didn't appear on any directory. The badge the receptionist slid across the counter didn't bear a unit insignia. It just read, "Visitor, Office of Special Programs." Inside, the air felt engineered. No scent of coffee, no paper, just filtered nothingness. Fluorescent lights hummed above polished floors. At the end of a sterile corridor waited a conference room that looked less like a meeting space and more like an interrogation cell dressed for polite company. Seated at the far side was a man Ethan recognized from Pentagon photos, Dr. Marcus Ellery, the bureaucrat whose name never landed in newspapers but always appeared on classified distribution lists. "Captain Kade," Ellery greeted, folding his hands. "You've stumbled into something that isn't meant for sunlight. That demonstration at Fort Ravenwood, call it a validation test, a step in a larger design." Ethan didn't sit. "You're telling me that girl's performance was planned?" Ellery's eyes gave nothing. "We don't recruit talent," he said quietly. "We rewrite limits." The words hit harder than any technical lecture could have. Ethan had heard whispers apex soldiers, augmented shooters, but hearing it spoken so plainly stripped away rumor. "And the purpose?" Ethan asked. Though he already knew no program stayed hidden without a target. Ellery clicked a remote. A screen lit with a satellite image of jagged mountains, ridges cutting into a high desert like claws. Shamal Gorge. Overlaid were red patrol markers and, finally, a grainy photo of a bearded man with cold, calculating eyes. Ibrahim al-Hadi, financier, recruiter, a survivor of 3 drone strikes. "Our analysts predict he'll move through this valley in 72 hours. Ellery said, "Too deep for UAVs, too fortified for ground assault. Only a bullet can reach him. But the shot requires 300-400 meters. No one else can make it." Ethan stared at the map. 3,400 meters. He knew the math at that range. Even the Earth's curvature became an enemy. One gust of crosswind, and the bullet would drift the length of a car. "And if she fails," Ellery's voice carried no hesitation, "then the program burns with her." Bootsteps struck tile. General Ross Talbot entered, his presence sharp as barbed wire. His chest was heavy with ribbons civilians couldn't decode. "Voss is prepping," Talbot said, "but Mercer's already stirring trouble. If he pushes too far, he could wreck this mission before it begins. We need you steady. Kade, if she's the real thing, we need a witness we can trust." Ethan lowered into a chair, pulse refusing to ease. He wasn't here to endorse a program, he was here because he couldn't walk away. Merrick's ghost had haunted him too long. Watching Voss, he'd seen a chance at redemption or damnation. His gaze returned to al-Hadi's photo, then to Talbot. "You're asking me to decide if she's a soldier or something else?" Talbot didn't answer. The silence was worse. And Ethan knew if Mercer was right, if this was smoke and mirrors, then Natalie Voss wasn't just holding a rifle. She was holding the weight of a war. Ethan Kade hadn't meant to follow the thread. He told himself it was professional instinct, maybe just the sting of Mercer's outburst. Yet hours after the range incident, he was parked outside a gray, windowless building in Arlington. One that existed only for those who knew where to look. The badge the receptionist slid across the counter didn't bear insignia. Just visitor. Office of Special Programs. Inside. The air felt engineered sterile. Odorless. Humming with fluorescent restraint. The conference room at the end of the corridor looked less like a meeting space than a holding cell dressed in polite furniture. Waiting there was Dr. Marcus Ellery, the quiet bureaucrat whose name appeared only on distribution lists marked eyes only. "Captain Kade," Ellery said, hands folding neatly. "That shot at Fort Ravenwood, consider it a validation. Proof the design holds." Ethan didn't sit. Design Ellery's smile was thin. "What you witnessed wasn't chance. Task Force Ghost doesn't select operators. We refine them. Push past limits most people don't even believe exist." He left the details: biochemistry, neural training, ballistics dangling in the air like hooks. Enough to suggest depth. Enough to unsettle. A remote clicked. The wall lit with a satellite image of jagged mountains. Ridges clawing through high desert. Shamal Gorge. Red icons marked patrols. Finally, a photo: Ibrahim al-Hadi, a financier, recruiter, ghost who had outlived 3 drone strikes. "He'll pass through here in 72 hours, Ellery said. "Too deep for air power, too fortified for teams. Only a bullet can reach him. 3,400 meters. No one can make that shot except Voss. Ethan's pulse ticked. At that distance, even the Earth's curve turned traitor. A whisper of wind could drift a bullet a car's length. And if she fails, Ellery's expression didn't shift. Then the program burns in daylight, which is why your role matters. You'll observe. You'll confirm viability. Boots struck tile at the doorway. General Ross Talbot entered. Metals heavy across his chest, presence sharper than barbed wire. Voss is prepping, Talbot said flatly. But Mercer's stirring the pot. He doesn't buy Ghost if he pushes too far. He could fracture this mission before it breathes. We need you steady. Kade, we need a witness. For a moment. Ethan thought of Merrick, his old spotter. The one miss that had cost lives he still carried. Watching Voss felt like standing at that edge again, redemption or ruin. He lowered into the chair. Eyes on Al-Hadi's photo. You're asking me to decide if she's human, or something we've made. Talbot didn't answer. The silence was its own verdict, and beneath it, one thought anchored in Ethan's chest. If Mercer was right, if Ghost was illusion, then Natalie Voss wasn't just carrying a rifle, she was carrying the fate of a war. The mountains of Shamal Gorge didn't welcome intruders. They loomed like jagged sentries, their slopes painted with shadows and shifting winds. For Task Force Ghost. It was the stage of a mission no one had dared before. Natalie Voss lay prone in a hollow of rock. The emerald spread out before her like an altar. Ethan Kade crouched just behind, scanning through his binoculars. Every breath carried grit. Every second felt borrowed. 3 days of insertion had led to this. Blackhawk insertion at night. A climb through goat trails barely wide enough for boots. Packs that cut into shoulders until skin peeled raw. And now, after all the hardship, they were exactly where the intel said Al-Hadi would appear, threading his convoy through the canyon floor. Believing cliffs and distance made him untouchable. Target will be in play in 90 seconds, whispered the comms operator, voice steady despite the tension bleeding into every man. The shot wasn't just long, it was insane. 300-400 meters. Crosswinds gusted like invisible hands clawing at the gorge. Mirage shimmered over the valley floor. Even the Earth's curvature demanded compensation. And yet the barrel of Voss's rifle didn't waver. Kade studied her. Most shooters jittered under stress, adrenaline leaking into muscle memory. Natalie seemed carved from the stone beneath her, eyes behind glass. Breaths counted. Every motion economized into nothing but inevitability. She wasn't nervous, she was burdened, down in the valley. Al-Hadi's convoy rolled into view. Technicals armed with mounted guns, fighters with scarves and rifles slung casual. And in the center, a black SUV, windows dusted over from the desert. There. Ethan muttered. Second vehicle, back seat. Voss didn't respond. She made the adjustments, dialing for elevation, holding 0.5 mil against the wind, calculating bullet drift through heat waves. But what chilled Ethan wasn't her precision. It was the silence inside her. 30 seconds. Comms warned. Then came the crackle of unexpected radio traffic, unfamiliar. Encrypted but hurried. The spotter's face paled. Sir, we've been burned. Hostile patrol inbound from the East Ridge. We're compromised. The words slammed through the team like shrapnel. Extraction wasn't due for another hour. If they were found pinned here, Ghost was finished. General Talbot's voice hissed through Ethan's earpiece from the distant command post. She takes the shot, no matter what. Mission priority. The order left no space for argument. The team stiffened, weapons swiveling toward the ridge where dust plumes now spiraled, a hostile quick reaction force closing fast. 15 seconds. The comms operator barked. Ethan leaned close. Natalie, if you don't fire now, we lose everything. But if you miss, her lips barely moved. I won't miss. The gorge itself seemed to tighten. A stone throat waiting to swallow them whole. Boots thundered in the distance. Shouts echoing. Rifles clattering. Above it all, Natalie exhaled long, steady, final. Her finger brushed the trigger, and Ethan knew the world was about to pivot on a bullet. The rifle cracked, echoing like thunder trapped in stone, and before anyone could breathe, the canyon erupted with enemy gunfire. The bullet reached the valley before sound did, through her scope. Natalie Voss saw the SUV's rear window bloom into shards. Then the sudden stillness of the man inside. Al-Hadi's head snapped back and then slumped, lifeless. 3,400 meters. A shot that defied history, gravity, and doubt. But there was no time for awe. Gunfire tore through the gorge as the enemy reaction force poured down the ridgeline. Ghost returned fire, disciplined bursts cracking into the dust. Ethan Kade found himself firing not just for survival, but to buy seconds for the shooter who had just rewritten the rules of war. Rockets screamed, dust and stone rained down. The team pulled back in bounding movements, dragging packs, laying suppressive fire. Voss stayed last, calm even as tracers stitched the rock around her. She slung the MRAD, lifted her carbine, and moved like she'd been carrying rifles through ambushes all her life. Then came the twist. No one expected friendly call signs over the comms. Sentinel team emerging from the opposite ridge. Frank Mercer himself, bloodied but firing. His accusations forgotten in the storm. He'd come not to sabotage, but to keep the secret from spilling into enemy hands. Betrayal or loyalty, it blurred in the roar of battle. Extraction thundered in with Blackhawks at the edge of blackout. Rotor wash whipped grit into eyes as ropes dropped. Ghost and Sentinel hauled one another aboard. Wounded first. Ammo nearly gone. Ethan shoved Natalie up the rope last, his own arm screaming as he climbed into the bird under a hail of bullets. When the gorge finally fell away beneath them, silence filled the cabin. The mission was complete. Al-Hadi was dead, but the cost was written on every face: blood, exhaustion, and the unspoken question of what exactly they had unleashed with Task Force Ghost. Days later, at Bram's secure facility, Ethan watched Natalie stand before the brass. They spoke of commendations, of doctrine-changing shots, of technology validated, but when she walked past him afterward, her eyes carried something heavier. Not triumph, not glory, just the weight of knowing that the line between soldier and weapon had shifted, and she was the proof. Years would pass, programs would expand, myths would grow about the ghost sniper who hit the impossible shot. Yet those who were there remembered more than the kill. They remembered the silence after, and the question that never left: what does it cost to make war less human? Ethan Kade carried his answer quietly, watching Natalie disappear into the shadows of her next assignment. He realized redemption doesn't come from erasing ghosts, it comes from honoring them, from refusing to let sacrifice be forgotten. Because in the end, war will always demand the impossible. What matters is who bears the weight, and whether we remember they were human first. Greatness isn't forged in trophies or records. It's born in the silence after the shot, in the choice to carry the burden when no one else can. And sometimes, the bravest thing a soldier can do is remind the world that even ghosts were once flesh and blood.